This is Design Safe Radio, where natural hazards researchers strive to make our society more resilient to everything nature throws at us.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Design Safe Radio. I'm your host, Dan Zahner, and today we have with me Alejandro Martínez. He's a professor of civil environmental engineering down at UC Davis, the Geotechnical Modeling Center down there. Although he's calling in from his sabbatical, which we really appreciate, so a little bit of a different time zone than normal. Good to see you, Alejandro. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. It's 5 p.m. here. It's probably 8 a.m. your time.
Yep. We're just about a third of the way through the coffee cup.
Okay. Sounds good. I've already had 2 or 3 today, so.
Good, I hope so. Well, yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get started into our conversation for the day.
Sure, yeah. I'm a associate professor at UC Davis. I've been there for almost 8 years. It's really gone by fast, and so as part of the the research that I've done there, I've been doing more and more centrifuge testing with both the large centrifuge and small centrifuge that we have at Davis. And before I started working there, I had never seen a centrifuge in person. So I had never worked with data from a centrifuge or anything like that. So it's been great to learn and little by little get more and more involved, and really is a nice tool to do geotechnical research, because it allows us to sort of upscale things and look at how things would behave out in the field. So yeah, I've been at Davis, like I said, about 8 years. I've loved it there. Before moving there, we lived in Atlanta, Georgia. So much bigger place. Yeah, pretty big city, different weather and everything. But yeah, we've loved it so far. It's been a good ride.
Okay, so you're down at UC Davis. You've been there for a while. Done a lot with centrifuges, and we've actually, if you are listening now and haven't heard about the UC Davis centrifuge facility, go back and listen to our episode with Jason DeYoung. It's really good, and we'll have a link somewhere in here to that. So if you're not familiar with the UC Davis facility, you can go back and listen to that great episode. So for you, in the realm of natural hazards engineering, these concepts of bio-inspired and biomediated geotechnics are pretty new. So can you explain and give some examples of some of the research that is going on at UC Davis there?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the name of these subfield of geotechnical engineering that combines Bioinspired and biomediated is called biogeotechnics. That's sort of I don't know if anybody coined that term, but it's more just what people started using, and I think it's
a little easier to say.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, it gets pretty long. So biogeotechnics. So there's like 2 subparts. One part is bioinspiration, which it has other names like biomimicry or sort of learning from nature. And so in bioinspiration, we don't really use any living animal in our research necessarily, or in the solution that eventually will make it to the field. In bioinspired geotechnics, we learn what animals and plants and even bacteria do. We learn how they interact with the soil, for example, how they anchor themselves to the ground, like that tree I have behind me. The roots of that tree are its foundations, right? And so the roots are what are holding the tree down, what are keeping it from leaning, from sinking too much, and from resisting wind loads, for example. And so we learn how animals and plants can interact with the soil in ways that are pretty cool. And in many times, and I mean, this has been documented in the literature, both in biology and also in geotech, the ways in which animals and plants totally surpass what we can do as engineers. So, for example, there's a study that quantified the material efficiency of tree roots and compared it to traditional foundations. And it turns out that a tree needs about 10 times less material.
Wow.
Either per mass or per volume than we can, with our conventional foundations. And so there are certainly things that the trees are doing, and mostly for this case, it's in the shape of the roots, right? And the main difference is tree roots are not straight, just going vertically down, but they have these very intricate shapes. And so that's what gives it the very high capacity. And so that's an example, learning from nature and understanding how animals and plants do something. A lot of times that involves working with a biologist because they're the ones that study these systems.
Right.
And so working with them and they have questions also about how the soil and the ground affects the behavior. Let's say, for example, for a tree, what sorts of soil conditions or soil types may affect how the tree grows, right? That's kind of a biological question, but you need to know geotech to answer.
Yeah.
From the geotechnical point of view, it's sort of the opposite. We know how foundations work, but we don't know very well how trees look like, why they grow the way they grow. And so there's a lot of interdisciplinary work. So that's the first one, by inspiration. I prefer calling it by inspiration than biomimicry, but that's just my preference.
Yeah.
The other one is biomediation, which does involve some biological process. So it involves using or sort of enticing an organism to do something that eventually will help improve soil properties, for example. And so I would say that the two most prevalent cases or examples of biomediation are biocementation, in which we can make bacteria, in a way, really happy. We can feed this bacteria a lot. This is a specific type of bacteria that takes some products like urea, for example, and in the process of reproducing and living and just doing their own thing, what they can do is then they can secrete a waste material for them, which is calcium carbonate, which what it does is then it can cement particles together. And so the sort of byproduct of the bacteria just reproducing and being really happy is cement between soil particles that can increase the strength and the stiffness and things like liquefaction resistance and things like that. And so there,
you're talking to a professor at Portland State University about that, looking at the Port of Portland, which kind of near and dear now. Living in Eugene, thinking about that. So
yeah, very close to you for sure. Yeah, and I think they did that, and they also did the other sort of technique that doesn't hinge on cementation, but more on desaturation. And so in a similar process, bacteria, when in the biological reactions they do in their processes, they in this case secrete bubbles of gas. I think it's nitrogen or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but they secrete a gas, and so that creates a lot of little bubbles in the ground. And so what that does is that it increases the resistance to liquefaction. When we have an earthquake and the ground shakes, what can happen is that the water in the soil can sort of get pressurized, and that makes the soil behaves kind of like a liquid. That's why it's called liquefaction. But it turns out that if you have a gas, then the gas bubbles can compress, and that sort of relieves some of that pressure. And so we can also use bacteria in that way.
Wow.
And so in the biomediation, we use biological process, and we sort of, like I said at the beginning, we entice or we make a given organism really happy to just do a given process that we're interested in, and then that then has benefits, geotechnical benefits in this case.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially important work where it seems like it's a relatively low cost way of doing mediation as well. You're not like driving piles into the ground or refounding buildings or anything like that. It's just injecting some solution into the ground that is harmless to everything else, but it increases.
Certainly that's one of the sort of attractions of really of bio inspiration, biomediation. I think biomediation maybe that there's a bit more bigger challenges in terms of, for example, environmental permitting.
Yeah.
Because if we're first of all, what we need to inject to make these bacteria grow, they're chemicals, and so usually they're not harmful chemicals, but we are changing the equilibrium conditions in the ground.
Right.
And also what we're doing is we're sort of creating this environment where this particular type of bacteria outcompetes everything else. And so there's also, an assessment that needs to be done of will the bacterial population recover, and what are the effects and all of that stuff. And also there's byproducts of this process that also need to be assessed. But people are doing good work in those areas to really quantify what is the effect. But I think you're right in that if the more we can move away from using carbon intensive materials like steel and concrete and things like that, which, I mean, they're great materials, but if we can replace them at least partially with other materials that don't require so much energy or carbon production, then that certainly helps with the sustainability of construction.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Design Safe Radio. Be sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform you happen to be listening to this on. It really helps people find our show. Thanks to our amazing sponsors, the National Science Foundation and the NHERI Network Coordination Office, which is award number 2129782. Big thank you to Marty LaChance, our guest booker and topic researcher extraordinaire, and Raquel Ruiz, who is our video and audio editor. I'm your host and NHERI Facility Scheduling and Operations Coordinator, Dan Zahner. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, stay resilient.